My name is Madeline McCully and I'm a traditional storyteller. And the first story that I would like to tell about a haunted place in County Antrim is in Ballymoney. And it's the story of George Bloody Hutchinson. Now you may wonder where the bloody comes from. Well, I'm going to tell you. Because on Friday the 13th and on Halloween night, George Hutchinson rises from the dead. And the whole story goes way back to the 1798 uprising. And this was happening all over. And I mean, there was a rebellion in America, the Revolution, and then there was one in France. And people were rising up against the government because the government were really treating the ordinary people very badly. And in Ireland, the Church of Ireland was the church to which people paid tithes. Anybody else, like the Presbyterians, the Catholics, other dissenters, they didn't get anything. And they weren't able to afford land. And if you couldn't afford land, then you didn't get a vote. So they were disenfranchised. And the United Irishmen said, you know, we've got to liberate people, we've got to make them equal. We can't go on with this sort of rule that pushes us down. And they saw themselves as liberators. And Henry Joy McCracken was the one in Belfast who led the United Irishmen. And Wolfe Toon was all over Ireland, started in Dublin. But in a little place called Ballymoney, there was a man called Alexander Gamble. And Alexander Gamble held a meeting and he invited other men, one of them being Sam Bonington and another one being Alan. And he invited them to accompany him and to try and gather some other men around him. And as a lot of men actually joined the United Irishmen, and when there were enough to be able to march to Ballymena, they marched there, and on the way they called others, come on, join us, we're the liberators, come join us. And they took Ballymena, and then they headed for Randalstown. And on the way between Ballymena and Randalstown, more and more people gathered behind them. And then they went off to Antrim. Now this is where it all started to go wrong, because Henry Joy McCracken's men were supposed to meet them in Antrim and they were supposed to vanquish Antrim. But Henry Joy McCracken's people, they didn't arrive in time. So whenever Alexander Gamble and his friends arrived in Antrim, they were just met with musket fire. And it was a slaughter. It really was. Even the ones who were lying wounded on the ground, the soldiers came round and they shot them dead. Now, George Hutchinson was the magistrate in Ballymoney. And he said, he was told that this was a bed of rebellion. And the soldiers would have to do something about it. And they did. They torched it. They went from house to house, burning down the houses. Women and children ran out. As soon as the man ran out, he was shot. And George Hutchinson said, round up all the rebels. And they did try to get most of them. But you know, they didn't put all of them through the due process of law. Some they actually took and they hanged from trees. And two of the men who were hung from trees at the top of a hill near Ballymoney, in a place called Stranocum, were Sam and Alan. And they were buried there. Well, Alexander was arrested and he was brought before the magistrate, George Hutchinson, who was known to be someone who had absolutely no mercy. I mean, if you were just thought to be involved, you could be flogged, you could be deported. But if you were known to have some sort of activity with the rebels, you were hanged. But what really annoyed and irritated, and even stronger than that, brought an awful lot of anger to the people of Ballymoney was that Alexander Gamble was marched down the main street and he was hanged from the clock tower. And he was left hanging there so that that would be a lesson to everybody else. But you see, Alexander, he was a man of honest faith. And George Hutchinson said to him, you know, if you inform on any other rebels, I will spare your life. And his answer was, I will meet my God, I know not when, but I will never have it cast up to my children's faces that I betrayed a friend. And that was what really set George Hutchinson off. And as he was marched down, people started shouting, bloody, bloody, bloody. And that's how he got the name of George Bloody Hutchinson. Now, he lived to be quite old, 82 or so, and he was buried in the churchyard beside the old church. And a large tomb there, really fancy tomb, but the local people called it the gateway to hell. And it's said that on the 13th of the month, Friday the 13th of the month, and also on Halloween, that the gates of hell open. And when they open, George Bloody Hutchinson comes out with a chain around his ankle and a ball attached to that. And he limps his way right down the main street, right down to the clock tower, where he stops and slowly turns and makes his way back up. Now, it's said that if anybody is foolish enough to meet him on that main street, they will disappear with him into the gateway of hell. And there's another little bit to the end of that story. About 50 years ago, the bones of two men were dug up when a road was being made, and they were the bones of Sam Bonington and his friend. And they were buried in the same graveyard as George Hutchinson. And it's hoped that they make his death and his eternity as miserable as he made their lives.